Welcome to the Audit Opinion podcast. I'm Anthony Harrison. I'm actually the Chief Marketing Officer at Inflow, and I am the host of today's podcast. So today I get to turn the table on Inflow's CEO, Mark Edmondson, who of course normally hosts this podcast and is the one asking the questions, but not today. So today we'll be talking about Mark's third book. I have a copy here, of course I do, The Creek Way. So, Mark, thank you for handing the reins over to me today. Let's start at the beginning, right? What inspired you to write The Creek Way, and high level, what's it all about?
Well, thank you, Anthony. The Creek Way is the third book that I've written in this series of children's style books that are really tackling topics around innovation and change management. And one of the things that I've been seeing in the market that we work in, the profession that we support, has been how firms, accounting firms that we're supporting and the leaders within there need to think a little bit differently around the way they approach innovation with the more modern technologies that are now available in the market. So previously, technology implementations would have been quite a big project management exercise. It would have predominantly led to a waterfall style approach where we're trying to work out exactly the detailed timetable, milestones, etc., that we need to implement and make a change. And really what we're seeing is that there's more of an opportunity to take a more agile approach. So taking incremental, smaller steps and then looking at the data, measuring the success and making changes to get to success more quickly and to be able to bring in new ideas, new innovations on a more phased approach. And so the book tells the story in a very different way of effectively the classic debate of waterfall versus agile and how firms can think differently about the way they bring new technologies and innovation into their businesses.
Very nice. As you said at the beginning, this is your third fable-style business book, right? And I get asked this question a lot. In fact, I was asked earlier in the week at an event that we were at, is it a children's book? Who's the book actually aimed at?
Well, we use a children's illustrator to bring the story to life, and he does a fantastic job, does Chris, in all three of the books, really elevating the story onto the page. Because for me, the power of storytelling is only partly through words. It's the visuals and it's the way that the story is brought to life that really makes it a more engaging discussion. So from the outside looking in, it's a children's book in the sense of it's illustrated. There's fantastic pictures in this book where we're using animals as the key people involved in the story, inspired by my oldest daughter, Lucy, who wanted to see a book that was all animals. But actually, it's a book for adults and for leaders in firms who can use it to understand the concept themselves, but also as a way of using the power of storytelling to then go back to their business and go and basically communicate more effectively with their senior team around the need for change, the need for innovation, but also across the broader business that they're running, and use storytelling as a means of communicating why do we need to change, what do we need to think about as we're making those changes. So to answer your question, it's actually both. It's a kid's book in the sense that I sit down, read it to my kids, and many other people who've got a copy of one of the three books have sat down, have taken their kids through the story, and the kids love it because of the pictures, the images, and the story means something and makes sense to them. But it's got the alternative understanding, that layer deeper, that adults should and do get a lot of insights from the underlying messages that's baked within the story.
Love it. We certainly saw a lot of people when we did the soft launch in the US last week. It was quite satisfying to see a lot of people sitting around in the corridors and after the sessions, just sitting there reading it, chuckling away. Definitely quite a satisfying moment. I'm sure it was for you as it was for me. So I have your other two books here. I have the original, A Better Axe. I have Partnering Up With Me. I've heard some people refer to them as the best trilogy since Lord of the Rings. Are they a trilogy? And how does the Creekway build on the themes from the first two books? Are they connected, I guess, is what I'm asking.
So they're not connected. They're all independent stories, completely different characters across the books. The first story, A Better Axe, is really about how people respond when there's a step change in the technology landscape. So the story is all about a man who runs a logging business, Jack, and despite the fact that the market has clearly moved on and he's using chainsaws and there's new entrants to the market who've embraced these new techniques, Jack is clinging to the past and sticking with his trusty axe. So it tells the story about how when there is a step change in the capabilities that are in the market, you need to think quite differently about how you innovate. It's no longer good enough to have a better mousetrap or a better axe in this particular story. You need to respond to those bigger shifts in technology capabilities. And I think what we're seeing with ChatGPT, generative AI as a classification, starts to indicate the value of that story and proposition. We can't just simply embrace small incremental changes. There is a big step change that's happening in the accounting profession and more broadly across the world of business. Partnering up was a different take on vendor selection. Effectively, how when you're looking for tools, technologies in the market, it can be equally, if not more important to actually consider the people behind the technology. So who do you want to partner with to be able to modernize your business? And Jane, the main character, interviews a series of 4 different candidates for an important role in her business. And each of those characters demonstrates the kind of traits that you might expect to see in the solution providers that are available on the market. Interestingly, in that story, you also get to vote or to interact with who you would hire at the end of the story based on the characteristics and the criteria that they've demonstrated during the interview processes. The Creekway is focused much more on how to think about waterfall versus agile or just more modern innovation techniques. It's heavily inspired by The Geek Way by Andrew McAfee, a fantastic book that I would recommend everybody should be reading. But it's the centralized behaviors of what does it actually look like to be thinking a more old school traditional way of innovation. So big senior board meetings, decisions at high levels, taking a long time to implement change, or actually decentralizing innovation, empowering a group of people to be able to make changes, to check the data and understand what those changes are meaning, and then to continually innovate. Interestingly, we are able to use 2 groups of animals. The zoo animals are following the traditional old school way of doing things, and the farm animals are following a far more modern and incremental approach. And again, it allows us to understand not just the bigger macro concepts, but actually what the kind of behaviors that you might see in your business that you want to call out and say, actually, that's an old school way of thinking about this. We should be thinking about it more like the farm animals do.
Yeah, and coming on to the farm animals, right? Clearly they're let's say the sharper ones in the book. They're not to give the plot away, but they've definitely had a little bit more success than the poor zoo animals. How do those animals, the farm animals, represent agile thinking in practice?
Well, each of the animals displays certain different characteristics of what you'd consider far more modern innovation practices. So some of the animals are focused on setting clear goals. Some of them are focused on using data and reporting to make the decisions that they want to make. Some are thinking about A/B testing as ways of experimenting with 2 potential ideas at the same time and measuring to see which one is better. And some of them are really all about empowering the broader team rather than taking I'm going to be the one who gets all the credit for this initiative, actually enabling the team with the tools and the resources for them to take accountability and responsibility going forward. So each of the animals demonstrates individually some of these traits, and then you can see the power of those collective skills and that collective mindset as the farm animals approach the way that they can improve their business through these more modern techniques.
You've used a lot of humor and character traits throughout the book, right, to highlight, I guess, common leadership pitfalls. How close to real life are these characterizations? So are any of the characters based on people you've met along your career, or are they purely fictional?
Purely fictional, but I think everybody will probably recognize some of the traits that are in there. They've seen them before, they've seen people they know demonstrating them. So no specific people in mind when we're thinking about these characters or these animals, but certainly I've seen all of these characteristics firsthand in my professional career, both in terms of the firm that I used to work for before I founded Inflow, and also in the conversations that I've had with senior leaders as they evaluate technology. Some of those behaviors are very positive, and I can see already that people are embracing some of the more modern approaches here. Some of them have caused headaches and problems in firms being able to benefit from new technologies, new approaches, benefiting their people, to be quite candid. So I think as everybody reads the story, they will probably see behaviors that they've experienced firsthand, that they recognize in other people. And what I hope is that it will provide a framework for people to be able to have a good conversation around the positive behaviors that they're seeing and that they want to empower, and maybe some of the more challenging behaviors that they want to start trying to remove from their processes and their decision making.
And that framework you mentioned, it feels like across a lot of organizations, their approach to innovation, agile, varies wildly, right? So what are some of the biggest myths or perhaps understandings that you see leaders implement when it comes to both of those two topics, innovation and, I guess, agile transformation?
I think the biggest challenge I see is that people think they understand agile because they understand the word agile, and that actually the agile methodology is about much more than being flexible, for example. It's around a really clear mindset and framework of how you go about implementing and leveraging the agile methodology. So it's not just about let's make incremental changes, let's be more flexible, etc. And what the book does is calls out some of those broader thought processes that really are integral to the agile methodology being applied. I've seen many people talk in market about we're following an agile approach. And that seems to be used in a sense of we're not really going to commit to doing anything and we'll see how it all plays out. And that's not what agile is all about. So the biggest misunderstanding I've seen, or the biggest misuse of agile, has simply been in the level of understanding of what agile represents as a methodology rather than as a word.
Been working closely with you over the years. I know you talk a lot about measuring success, but also learning from failure. Why do you think that mindset is so crucial for modern leadership as one of the topics that you find in the Greek Way?
Great question. So celebrating success, first and foremost, I think I and many other leaders are so excited about looking forward and what's ahead and the opportunities that we have in front of us that sometimes we don't look backwards enough and check how far we've come. And that might be fine for us as leaders individually, because what motivates us and excites us about doing what we do is what's ahead. But it can run the risk that it doesn't empower the team sufficiently to take stock of we've just achieved this big milestone, this big thing. And it's important to make sure the team is recognized for and feels appreciated for the work that has gone before, not necessarily just simply looking at, okay, we've climbed that mountain, next mountain, let's go, kind of thing. So for me, celebrating success is really important to make sure the team understands the value and feels appreciated for the value of what they're delivering day in, day out. We've got some incredible people in our business who do incredible things, and there's always the risk that that gets taken for granted as that's just business as usual if we don't take the opportunity to celebrate success. So simple things like we have a channel in Teams that is called Celebrating Success, and people post into that when there's something going on across the business that they think everybody should be aware of and we should be acknowledging as a broader team. The piece about learning from failure, I think, is one that people shy away from because that can feel like it's going to be a blame game conversation. Hey, let's jump on a call and talk about what we learned from the fact we messed up this thing recently. In the wrong setting, that's going to be people pointing fingers at each other and blaming each other. And what's really important and is emphasized in the Creep Way is that failure doesn't necessarily mean that we've not achieved something. It can be basically the first step towards achieving something successful, as long as it's framed in the right way. To be able to get the learnings from a failure, everybody needs to feel comfortable sharing and owning that something that they didn't go perfectly. In a no blame, let's work together on how we can do better to be able to then take that learning forward and benefit from it. Now, I'm not a subscriber to the fail fast, fail often, fail everywhere type approach, because there needs to be an acknowledgement that what we do, what accounting firms do, is a product of trust and is a product of confidence, and therefore the parameters that you can experiment within and you can fail within should be clearly defined to say, look, these are the areas where we cannot fail, and these are the areas that we should be focused far more on learning and iterative development than only doing something if it is going to be successful. And so for me, it's about empowering people to feel comfortable and confident in things like running after action meetings. Let's debrief how we did this. This is not a case of who did what, when, and why did it not get done. It's a case of when we are next in a similar situation, how can we capture what we learned on a timely basis from this thing that we just did? And what does it mean for us going forward?
So two very important points there, I think, for everyone to think about, I guess. So going back to the books, I was thinking about this earlier. So I love the fact that there are serious topics, if you like, right? Business lessons within the books. But the thing I love most about them is that they're just fun. Like whenever I see people interacting with them, it's typically with a smile. I think one of my favorite memories from these books was, I think when we launched the second book at Engage in Vegas last year, and one of the infamous inflow after parties, there was literally a queue of people waiting to get a signed copy of it. And I remember looking at you thinking, like, what the hell's going on? This is really taking off. In terms of like your favorite reactions, like what's that been across the three books? Any like standout feedback that you want to share? You know, how's it been received from leaders, readers of the book?
It's been really interesting because it's so different to what anybody else has ever really done in this space. And that's partly why I felt compelled to do something like this, was like, we want to be different, and this is a really fun way of articulating a serious message. You know, I could write a white paper about how important it is to think about these topics, or I could create a kids style book. And what I think the things that have really intrigued me or I've been blown away by in terms of the response have been a few things like one person came to an event and basically took a copy of the book, sat right down reading it over lunchtime, and then came back after lunch and said, "Can I get 9 more copies, please? Because I want to run a workshop in my accounting firm, and I want us to basically go through page by page a better acts and identify from there all of the learnings, all of the lessons that we could take away and apply in our business around the way we think about innovation." It's like, wow, that's an interesting way to run a training session or run a workshop in a firm. I
Yeah.
recently heard that one person had given the book to their nephew, niece, who was late teens, early 20s, and they'd taken it into their US university or college, and they'd basically done a lecture about the book and the key topics coming from the book, which, again, no idea that that was going to be something that people took from it. And then I do remember when we first did the first book, somebody who was a very technical audit methodology leader took a copy of the book and then emailed me about a month or so later saying they'd read it and they didn't appreciate until they read it for a second time the layers like within the story, if you like, of the at a high level a joke, which actually underneath it 2 levels is a very serious point around some kind of issue that you can see. But what was fascinating was I deliberately stitched those things a couple of levels deeper. So you had to basically understand the topic and understand the area to really get the richness of the story. And what was really enjoyable was people digging that deeper, thinking that in that way to be able to actually extract a different level of insight each time they read the book. So again, this book, the latest one, has somewhat of a kind of crescendo at the end that has caused people to then actually go back and reread the entire story in a totally different light, based on, as somebody once told me, that there's the sixth sense twist, if you like, at the end of, oh, now I understand how this has been playing out. I want to go back and read it, rewatch it, if you like.
That's a nice take on the doing the Sixth Sense twist. You mentioned right at the beginning, right? You said your daughters were part of the inspiration for the book. Does being a parent influence how you communicate leadership lessons, how you've developed this book?
What it's really taught me was that stories can really convey a message in a very different way to a variety of audiences, to try and get your message across. So I have 2 girls. They're only 18 months apart. They're 10 and 8 years old as we speak today. And as they were younger, I was reading the Aesop's fables to them. And what I found quite fascinating was I would read them an Aesop's fable and I would get to the end. And to me, as the grown-up reading the story, it was very obvious what the actual message was from the story. And at the end, I would say to my girls, so what did we learn from the story? And they would play back to me the very literal definition of what had happened in the story, not the kind of level deeper than that, which was the emperor with no clothes, if you like. Well, he's got no clothes on, Dad. Whereas there's clearly a deeper message there. And what I thought was quite fascinating was that meant that the stories that I was reading to them actually were playing at 2 different levels. They were enjoyable in the literal level, but they were also able to communicate a different message that over time they would begin to understand more clearly. So I loved the concept. I felt that it could be used so much more interestingly in a business concept. And I actually then wrote the first book and then was pointed in the direction of the book Who Moved My Cheese, which takes a similar kind of approach to this. And I was blown away by, that's kind of done the same thing. I really like the approach there. And I say the response has been fantastic from the people who've read these books. So it empowers you to keep thinking of new ideas. And is this something that we can communicate a message in a different way to try and get across to different people who have different ways of absorbing messages, something that's going to resonate with them.
You got a favourite moment or a quote from the book? Anything either that's you like from a fun perspective or anything that sort of captures the spirit of Agile?
That captures the spirit of Agile. I think that in the book, Spider runs a new change initiative that completely and utterly fails because of his literal interpretation of communication. So, building on the point that we just discussed, Spider takes a very literal interpretation of some feedback and some ideas he's overheard from other people and applies that only to find out that that is a significant failure. But the team very quickly coalesce around Spider to share some new ideas and turn his completely failed idea into something that is ultimately very successful. So without really revealing too many spoilers, I think that moment in the Creek Way is one that really encapsulates a lot of the things that are important around Agile.
You can see me smiling. There's a lot in there that really tickles me. There's some, yeah. I won't give anything away, but there's one image in particular that really, really cracks me up, and that's what I was thinking of when you were talking there. That's why I'm smiling. But as I said, no spoilers, no spoilers. Do you think you any plans for a fourth book? Do you see a future for more fables like this?
I definitely think there's a future. One thing I want to make sure is that there's a really important message underneath the stories. So I feel very pleased that I've had 3 important topics that I felt were very conducive to the storytelling format. At the moment, I don't have that 4th great idea, and so I'm not going to be forcing that. There's a lot of other things that I need to spend my time on beyond just writing children's books. It's somewhat of a hobby rather than a work passion, shall we say. Yeah. But I do want to do more in terms of the communication of the messages. So things like the cartoons that we've done and I've got behind us, I want to do more of that, trying to bring some more fun to the space that we're in, to the accounting profession more generally, because if we think about some of the bigger macro topics that everybody is thinking about right now, it's around how do we make the audit and the accounting profession more attractive. That's a mission that I'm very personally aligned to. And so whether it's a book, whether it's a cartoon, whether it's some other kind of format, what I am very committed to is continuing to bring more fun, more enthusiasm, a different take to this profession. So as we can really showcase that accountants aren't just a bunch of bean counters filling in checklists. I am an accountant and I am writing kids' books and doing cartoons and doing other things as ways of communicating the message that I want to communicate to the people that I want to. And I think that it's not just me, there's plenty of others out there who can do more to make the profession a more exciting and enjoyable profession for people to explore.
Not to put too much pressure, Mark, but what's the one message that you hope every reader walks away with after they've read The Creek Way? What's the big lesson?
I would say that the one message that I would want to get across from reading The Creek Way would be a shift in the tone of leadership and the approach that leaders take to innovation with their teams. Don't lock yourself in a room and strategize with your senior team to come up with a plan and then implement it like the zoo animals do. Go about as a leader empowering your teams with the tools, the accountabilities, the responsibilities, and the autonomy to go and make changes happen, to take ownership for those decisions, those changes, use data to evaluate the success of those, and continually iterate with agility so that you can quickly make smaller changes and build success. rather than sitting in a room and strategizing over a big grand plan.
Really well put. Really well put. And then lastly, an important question: how can people get their hands on the book?
If you want to get a copy of the digital version of the book, you can go to the website. That's either theauditopinion.com or inflow.com to get a copy of the digital version for free. If you want to get a copy of the physical book, then you're going to have to check out an event that will be present go to the booth, maybe Engage or one of the other events in the US or UK or further afield in the coming months. Or if you want to get one quicker than that, you can refer 5 people to subscribe to the Audit Opinion newsletter, and we will ship directly to you a physical copy of the book.
So thanks again, Mark. There's some stuff in there that I didn't know. It's great to get an overview of the book. I know there's no immediate plans for a fourth, but personally I'm looking forward to one. Maybe there's something in AI that we can do. I'm sure like everything else that's badged as AI, it'd be very popular. Thanks again for today, and hope everyone enjoyed the podcast.
Thanks, Anthony.